Okay, so this is a theory video where we're going to outline one of the core theories in media studies. In this particular case, it's a narrative theory, so this means a theory that is relating to the storyline of a media text, and it's called Propp's character theory. So let's just quickly go through what the theory entails and a bit of the history of it. So essentially, this guy called Propp, Vladimir Propp was his full name, he sat down and he looked at old Russian fairy tales. And he found that across 100 different stories that he'd looked at, there was a number of different types of character roles that kept appearing in every single one of them. So he identified 7 key roles that you will find in at least one of them in most narratives. What we'll do is first of all go through what those roles are, and then we'll talk about some examples of them, and then we'll maybe have a little bit about how you can use it when analysing a media text. So starting from what the actual 7 roles are, what Propp found was that nearly every story contains, as I say, one or more of the following. So first of all, we have the hero. The role of the hero is pretty straightforward. They are the main character typically, and usually there'll be some form of struggle that they need to overcome in order to be successful. There's then the villain, who again is fairly straightforward. This is essentially what we would refer to as the bad guy. Their role within the narrative will be to put a stop to whatever the hero needs to achieve, and will essentially act as a hurdle or a boundary to what the hero is aiming to do. They then get slightly more complicated. So there's the dispatcher. The role of the dispatcher is to inform the hero of an issue that needs to be solved and then sends the hero on his way. So essentially it will be telling the hero there's a problem, or it will be the way in which the hero learns about this problem and then is sent off to go and solve it. Along the way you'll get usually a helper or some helpers. These will be characters whose role it is to help the hero in their struggle. These will usually be considered main characters as well, but not as important as the hero. You then have the princess. Now I've put princess in quotation marks there for a very key reason. The princess is essentially what the hero wishes to gain from their adventure. Now it's called the princess because back in the days of old fairy tales, usually the hero would need to rescue the princess and then he would get to marry her. The actual goal there was to marry the princess and live a life with her. So actually it's not specifically a princess in the story, it is whatever the hero wishes to achieve in their adventure. What they want the end goal to be is what the princess will be. You then have the donor. The donor is a character who will provide something to the hero that allows them to complete their quest. And finally you'll have the false hero. This will be a character who often appears as a hero or is thought of as a hero by other characters, but then will later turn out to be potentially a form of the villain, or at least not the actual hero that we had originally thought they were. Now let's just go through a few of these. So some of them are very straightforward. So I'm going to use one example. Being a bit of a nerd, we're going to look at Star Wars. And this just goes to show that this doesn't just apply to old fairy tales. It can be applied to far more modern storylines, or in this case, a sci-fi movie. So, for example, the hero is seen in Luke Skywalker. So for those who haven't seen Star Wars, that's a photo of him there. Luke Skywalker is a hero in the sense that he is virtuous and he sets out on a quest to eventually save the galaxy. That's kind of his goal. There's a lot more to it than that, but he is a stereotypical hero and there's not much else to him. You can see he's even portrayed in a very heroic way in the fact he's wearing entirely white. And then the counterpart in Star Wars to Luke is, you've probably heard of Darth Vader. Now Darth Vader is, as I say, a counterpart. He is almost the opposite of Luke. He is evil. He is very much invested in stopping Luke from progressing in his adventure. Now those are very, very simple examples from a very simple storyline. However, there are a few extra rules that you can consider from Propp's character theory. The first one is that characters can act as more than one of the roles in a storyline. So jumping back to our Star Wars example, if we look at a character called Obi-Wan Kenobi. Now Obi-Wan acts as several different characters. First of all, he's the dispatcher because he's the one who tells Luke about one of the problems that needs solving, essentially. And he also is the donor, because it's, later on in the storyline he actually gives his own life to allow Luke and the rest of his helpers to escape. The fact that he fills both of these roles simultaneously is quite common, particularly in modern storylines. So don't be afraid when you are discussing this to apply multiple roles to one character within your narrative. The second twist in the rule is roles in the plot are not always characters. They don't have to be people. So in this case, let's have a look at the princess. So the princess, as I say, is what the hero wants to achieve from their adventure. Now Luke could be looked at wanting to achieve several different things. So all of these, or one of these, could be argued to be considered the princess or the goal. So first of all, there is the character who is called Princess Leia. Luke originally sets off to go and save her, so the obvious determination would be, if he is successful, he will have saved the princess and then she'll become part of his life, essentially. So that is the obvious definition of it. The fact that she's called Princess Leia also drops a strong hint towards that. However, it's not entirely that simple, because actually when we start the storyline, Luke's ultimate goal is to leave his boring life on a desert moon where he lives and go and join the rebellion. And in fact, by the end of the storyline, we find that Luke becomes a hero of the rebellion and effectively saves the day. You could argue this status as a member of the rebellion, as a warrior that fights alongside them, but also becoming one of their heroes, could be the princess that he wished to attain all along. On top of that, it doesn't just have to be a goal in terms of ideologically, as in becoming a hero. It could be an object. So for example, as I said, Luke wanted to get off the desert moon on which he lived, and actually the tool that he uses to do this is the Millennium Falcon, which is quite a famous spaceship now. You could argue that the princess is the Millennium Falcon because it's what he needed in order to go and gain the life that he wanted. So what that means is essentially there are several things throughout the storyline of Star Wars that could be argued to be the princess. So when you're looking at narratives, it's very important you effectively look outside the box and think to yourself what could fulfill each role. As long as you can back it up with an argument, there is no wrong answer. So how do you apply this to a media text? Now, it's very important to realise that the theory can be applied to nearly any media text. Anywhere where you could discern some form of storyline from what we are seeing, you can apply this to you can apply this theory to it. So this doesn't just have to be films, it can be posters, it can be anything where, comics, it can be anything where you can discern even a very most basic of narratives of what is occurring in any image or video or audio that you may hear. You will typically want to use this theory when you're asked to discuss narrative. So remember, narrative is essentially the media term for storyline. Very often you'll find an examiner or a coursework task will ask you to discuss the narrative of a particular text. When you're asked for that, this essentially means they want you to talk about one or more of your narrative theories. So Propp's character theory falls into that box of being a narrative theory. So whenever you're asked to discuss narrative, Propp could be one of the theories that you want to go to. In terms of how to use it, the key goal of Propp's character theory is to identify what role each relevant area of the media text fulfills. By this I mean you sit down, you look at the storyline or you look at an image and you try to discern, right, who is each role. So try and identify a hero, potentially a villain, a helper, anything along those lines, and then you explain what evidence you have that shows that they are a member of that role.